The agency interprets it. We enforce the laws according to the way we interpret it, but then we can get overturned even though we had a good reason for why we were doing things the way we were doing it.
By a judge with no expertise.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
I said that we're going to be talking about Chevron, and I know what Chevron is, but I'm like a freak. And so explain to people, Colin, what the Chevron doctrine is and why it's important for federal regulatory agencies.
Yeah, absolutely. So Chevron doctrine refers to it was invented by the Supreme Court in a case where Chevron was I believe in litigation with the US EPA, but what they were talking about is how much deference, how much should a court listen to the agency's interpretation of the laws that they enforce. So the first step so Chevron's a two-step process. The first is the law itself clear about what it's talking about? Because if it is, then you don't need to address the agency's interpretation of it. Mm-hmm. But if it's not, so I work in Clean Water Act regulation, and the law defines our scope as waters of the United States, but that's it. It doesn't say what that is, right? So Chevron deference plays a big role in there because step number one is the law is not clear what are waters of the United States. So now the agency under Chevron would have prepared based on their scientific or in my case it's scientific, but based on their expert judgment as an agency, we prepare rules that go in the Code of Federal Regulations. So we prepare regulations that are based on our expertise on what those terms that are not clear in the law, what they mean. And under Chevron, the way that broke down was that if the agency had a well-reasoned interpretation, the court had to defer to it. And so what that looked like in practice is, let's say that there's 3 different ways to interpret this law, and they're all legal ways. They all could work, right? But the agency picked one, and they reasoned why they picked that one in the rulemaking process. And that's the one that we hold people to. The regulation has the force of law. But what Chevron would say is, let's say that it goes to court and the judge thinks that instead of option C, which the government picked, or, which the executive agency picked, they think that A is a better reading of the law. Well, under Chevron deference, as long as the agency's reasons for choosing C were legitimate, the court couldn't second guess that.
Right.
But with Chevron gone, that whichever of those 3 options the court thinks is best, that's the one that it goes with. So no matter whether the agency, so the agency interprets it, we enforce the laws according to the way we interpret it, but then we can get overturned,
right?
Even though we had a good reason for why we were doing things the way we were doing it.
By a judge with no expertise.
Right.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
And, ostensibly the reason that they say we want to overturn Chevron is because they say that, these federal regulatory agencies, they have way too much power. They're just taking so much power for themselves. This is belying the fact that this entire time, Congress has the ability to say,
clarify these issues.
Yes, exactly. If they say that, you're stepping a little bit outside of kind of what we had in mind when we wrote this law, or now we don't agree with this law anymore, actually, and we want to overturn it. Congress has this entire time had the ability to change the law, amend the law, clarify the law, bring back the boundaries, expand the boundaries, anything that they want to do.
Absolutely.
But the judicial branch is now taking this for themselves. And it's just the Liz Shuler with AFL-CIO came out with a statement yesterday saying this was a brazen power grab. And that's exactly right. And it's exactly right because you can actually take a look at the history of the Chevron doctrine and see that it was Ronald Reagan's EPA, which was argued by Neil Gorsuch's mom to get the Chevron deference doctrine installed, that this was a conservative, the Chevron deference doctrine was a conservative policy pushed by Reagan, because at that time, the conservatives held the, they felt like they held the levers of the administrative state, and they didn't want the judges looking at their decisions, basically.
They called them activist judges.
Yeah, exactly. They called them activist judges, so they didn't want them looking over their shoulder the whole time. And so this was a conservative policy put forward by Ronald Reagan's EPA with Neil Gorsuch's mom arguing for the EPA. And now they're overturning it because now they feel like, they don't hold all the levers of people in the administrative state, despite the fact that any time a president comes in, they get to pick all the political appointees. Any Congress can be elected at any time, and they can do all of the things that I said. It's totally ridiculous and completely, non-principled and brazen power grab by the courts and all this kind of stuff. So with that all out of the way, what does that mean then day to day as somebody who works in an affected, sector of the federal government? What does this mean for work like yours going forward?
So one of the main things that we're going to experience right from the get-go is just more destabilization. So Waters of the U.S. has been a political football for more than a decade now, and so we're somewhat used to this, but what it will mean for us is that we will have a much harder time enforcing the law. So when people voluntarily come and they get a permit from the Army Corps, that's not going to change. Our ability to issue permits, our ability to do most of our program is going to be fine. The big problem would come in enforcement, because now somebody could just say, well, I don't like the way you've defined, you, the agency, and your regulations have defined waters of the United States. And so I'm going to sue and I'm going to argue that you actually never had this power to begin with because you were using the wrong definition.
Right.
Even though our scientists put that together, oftentimes it's peer reviewed. It's, really well done work, but they're going to overturn it on a legal principle instead of a scientific one. And so it's going to make it harder for somebody like me to go to my boss and say, hey, this guy did work without a permit. We should go after him and hold him accountable. And now my boss is going to be even more skeptical of doing that, because what if we get dragged into some years-long litigation and end up losing ground in terms of how we interpret the law? And it's made even worse by another Supreme Court case from this week. And I don't know how much you're tracking this. It's called Jarkissi versus the SEC. And in that case, it was a major blow to the administrative law part of the government, where agencies that have used administrative law as a way to handle their workloads. And so this is where you have an administrative law judge who's an executive branch employee, they're an employee of the agency, who hears the case and actually, so they're acting like a judge. I mean, they are a judge, but they're not in the judicial branch. They're in the executive branch. That was almost completely undermined this week as well. And so now an agency, if they're looking at taking enforcement actions, and again, it's not just wetlands, but it's financial regulation. It's, OSHA, the worker safety regulations, take your pick. Agencies now are going to be double checking, and that costs more money. That costs more resources. It's going to lower our ability to enforce the laws.
Right. Yeah. Not good. Not good is basically the summary.
Exactly.
And one aspect of the overturning of the Chevron doctrine that connects to what we were talking about in the previous section is that they're now going to defer to amici briefs. So this idea that anybody, presumably, I guess you have to be a lawyer, can now weigh in and decide through legal argument that their interpretation of the law is better than the agency and its raft of scientists and experts.
Right.
They can weigh in. And so it's like, yes, it's a power grab by the judicial branch, but the judicial branch is standing in for the corporate interests. It's really, this is a massive power grab to dismantle the administrative state. This is decades in the making. And I think it's another opportunity for our federal sector unions to pursue yet another front. And it's a unfortunate but necessary opportunity for us to actually build a judicial advocacy branch of our operations that platforms the expertise that is no longer deferred to, and our unions could potentially become, platform the policy expertise that is no longer deferred to thanks to this recent terrible Supreme Court ruling. And it's just like there's all these different fronts, not to swing back to the previous segment, but like this is part of what we're fighting for, a federal sector that fights on all fronts, not just internal and external organizing, not just the legislative stuff, but also executive branch advocacy, judicial branch advocacy. If they want to tee us up this way and undermine the integrity of our agencies and their role, well, then our federal sector unions could become much more effective advocates on all these fronts.
Right. All right. Well, Chris Doles, Colin Smalley, thank you so much for taking the time, swinging by the studio. I appreciate it. Look forward to talking to y'all again. And
Can I correct the website?
yes, correct the website. Tell us the correct address.
It's still let's-organize. It's a hyphen, obviously, not the word dash. Let's-organize.org, obviously.
All right. There you go. Let's-organize.org. Appreciate y'all coming in.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.